This week, we discuss the categorization of the entire security industry. Paul and I are going to debate a few of those categorizations. In the leadership and communications section, CISOs who leave after 2 years may not finish what they start. Most CISOs ready to move jobs if something better comes along. A new framework for executive compensation and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Cybersecurity isn't only about stopping the threats you see, it's about stopping the ones you can't see. That's why Microsoft Security employs over 3,500 cybercrime experts and uses AI to help anticipate, identify, and eliminate threats. So you can focus on growing your business, and Microsoft Security can focus on protecting it. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Microsoft Security.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 165, recorded March 9th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island is my co-host, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Hey, Matt, it's good to be here. I'm super excited about this topic, by the way. It's going to be awesome.
We'll have to give a primer on why we're going through this.
Yeah.
Why?
But I mean, we're always going through this process, and I think for the C-levels and information security professionals in general, just to gain an understanding of how we kind of break down the entire market and industry and activities to a certain extent in security, I think is extremely valuable.
Yes, and look, we missed a couple things the first time that we want to also address as part of our interest categories for our
listeners. This goes
listeners.
back to when Matt and I used to work together at Tenable, actually.
Yes, it does. It goes way back. All right, but let me get through a couple quick announcements.
Sure.
Join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30th to April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort. It's currently still on, no cancellation yet. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the register button to register with our discount code or the schedule button to sponsor a micro interview. We're also looking forward to attending Secure World Boston March 25th and 26th at the Heinz Convention Center. The 16th annual conference brings together New England's InfoSec community for training, collaboration, and networking. This year's theme is Animal Defenses of the Animal Kingdom. Security Weekly listeners save $100 off their registration for a full conference pass. Go to www.secureworldexpo.com and register using the discount code Security Weekly, all one word. All right, let's get into this topic. So let's
set the stage.
Let's set the stage. One of the things we've been doing is migrating our listener interest list to a new email platform. And one of the issues we ran into is we wanted to be able to tag listener interest against these different categories to be able to notify users. Well, we have a limitation of 60, and we had like 72. So Paul said, why don't we consolidate some of these down, come up with a consolidated list of categories, kind of mapping across the 72 that we had, but also add some that we missed. And as Paul said, we did a lot of this preliminary work when we were at Tenable in driving the competitive lab and looking at all these different categories. And we've continued to expand it over the past couple of years at Security Weekly.
Yeah, but and as we do Enterprise Security Weekly, Business Security Weekly, we've talked about categories in general, as in the sense of play bigger, and try to identify when we talk about a story or a security vendor, identify them with a category. So this work has been really going on for years. Also, Matt, I didn't want our category list to keep growing because I think people will be confused as to just what are the categories in security. So while it is a limitation of some software that we work with, which I hate when software defines the requirements, right? I said, I think it's beneficial for us to have less categories and move to subcategories and or tags to explain everything that's within that main category.
Yeah, so what you did is you took a list of 70 plus, started to narrow it down of actual categories, and then you assign tags that we can now tag our content with for those kind of subcategories or those other sub-components.
So I think a good place to start is identity and access, because we actually just talked about this not that long ago, rather. And so under identity and access, and I think we said this on a previous show too, like there's PAM, privileged access management. There's IAM, identity and access management. Then there's passwords, and that could be passwordless authentication. There's multi-factor authentication. And I mean, those are all, in my opinion, Matt may disagree or agree, those are all falling under identity and access management, right?
There's probably one we could actually add here around single sign-on. When we were talking about the Ping story,
I would put that in this category. Too. Yeah, I would put that in the identity access category as well.
Yep.
To kind of
so
cover
there we go. We just added a new tag.
And I think for those developing a strategy, you need to carefully think about how your users are authenticating, what roles they have, how they're doing MFA, which they should be doing MFA, how encompassing that is. I mean, this is something every organization needs to spend some time thinking about, planning, and likely implementing something new, in my opinion, because I think that the passwordless authentication and MFA technologies have evolved to the point where in the next few years, more and more things are just going to be done without passwords because of their limitations.
Yep, agreed. The other big one you did some interesting consolidation in, and I agree with this one, by the way, is on the application security side.
Yeah, this was the largest subcategory list out of all of them, right?
It was, because the way we were tracking application security was through all these different, is it static code analysis, software composition, dynamic scanning, web app firewall. You consolidated all this down into a big application security bucket. And what's interesting about this is one of the big challenges I think the industry as a whole has is when you say AppSec, what does that mean?
Right.
It means a lot of these different pieces, actually. And so by consolidating it down and tagging it correctly, we can cover a big chunk of the market.
Yeah, and I think that not every application that you have is going to implement all of these technologies. And some of it isn't necessarily specific to an application, but your software development lifecycle. So you've got to figure out what are the common elements that you're going to put in everyone's process that is either writing software for your organization and or implementing other people's software, and how that gets built, tested, and deployed. And then there are going to be application-specific things where you're going to have a botnet, bot detection, right? Sorry, not botnet. Bot detection should probably be in application security, right? That may not be in every single app in your organization, but only in certain ones. And I think having that matrix and discussing with your teams, where do each of these technologies fall? What are the requirements of each application? But building off of a baseline that says, when we deploy software, everything on the front end and the other side of that, they all have these commonalities.
Agreed.
So much and so many pieces in there, right? It's just growing number.
Yeah. Now we added a couple on this list. You added attack surface management. And I think part of this came from our conversation at RSA with Psycognito and other vendors in the space. We didn't really have a place to put them. How do you deal with kind of that external attack surface, right? And so you came up with a category called attack surface management that we're going to add.
Right. And your attack surface isn't limited to someone can scan my IP ranges. And the vendors in this category are really digging deeper and deeper into finding basically all of the artifacts on the internet that relate to your company, and then drawing some kind of threat, risk, and some kind of model that tells you where you may be vulnerable, where you have exposures. And this could be places where your image shows up. This could be looking at SSL certificate chains. This could be looking at threat intelligence feeds, correlating that all together. I think this is something every organization should have, because it's easy, right? I mean, you get the vendor, and I mean, not what the vendor is accomplishes super hard, right? But I think for an organization, acquire one of these vendors, build it into your process. It should be something that everyone has, therefore deserving a list on the category side.
We also added bug bounty. We do cover a lot of bug bounty stories. They're not always associated with application security. So, we definitely added a separate category around bug bounties, which could cross over into a couple other areas. But
yeah,
again,
and that's fine. And there's lots of different ways to do bug bounties. And I think it's nice to have one category, whether you're contracting with a firm such as BugCrowd, or hosting your own bug bounty program, or the different ways in which you can implement a bug bounty program is a whole whether or not you should have a bug bounty program, right? These are all conversations that you should be having in your security teams and as an organization to figure out if you need it, where you need it, and how it should be structured. Because I think it does have a place, maybe not in every single organization, but certainly in most organizations, you should at least be having the discussion.
Yes. A couple interesting consolidations around cloud security and endpoint security. These make sense to me, Paul, right? We, especially on the endpoint side, endpoint protection, endpoint detection response, even file integrity monitoring, these are all endpoint specific focuses. A lot of people who are interested in any one of these is going to be interested in all of these. We did also some of that consolidation on the cloud side with the configuration side of cloud, CASBs, cloud workload protections, kind of bundle those all together.
Yeah, and the endpoint side, I think, really stemmed from my enchanting quadrants, right? And it talked about endpoint basically as one box, and so therefore, and now you might do multiple things on your endpoints to secure your endpoints, but to me, that all falls into you need some visibility into your endpoints, whether that's with a third-party product or, as we talked about on Paul Security Weekly, I think last week, using Microsoft's own technology, if many of your endpoints are in fact Windows, which most people's are, using the native tools or tools you can add on to your Microsoft subscription to do that level of monitoring. You can pull network telemetry from endpoints, you can pull logs. To me, that all falls in endpoint security, and then you slice it up from there.
You added security research as a new topic that includes exploit development, vulnerability research, reverse engineering, other things around the whole security research side. Again, had a couple segments where we didn't really have a place for them.
Yeah. And I mean, there are, and many of them are friends of mine, there are so many people doing outstanding work in security research. Many of it you don't see on a regular basis. Many never really publish their results, but when things happen on the internet, there are folks that are reverse engineering, pulling apart the binaries, doing vulnerability research, and fighting the good fight, really, to help secure our nation, to help understand what type of software, malicious software is out there, what its intent is, what it's doing. And to me, that whole thing deserved a category in and of itself to encompass not just exploit development, not just vulnerability discovery, as in I'm reversing to find a vulnerability, then I'm writing an exploit, but also reverse engineering malware out there today all fell, for me, under security research. So when you see that category and you see segments and stuff tagged with that category, that's what it encompasses.
Industrial control system security, SCADA systems, industrial IoT. We're going to kind of combine that together. We had IoT and industrial IoT kind of is two separate things, but I think calling out the industrial control side, or what some people call operational technology, OT, is a good way to categorize a chunk of stories that we cover across the network.
Absolutely.
On the operational side. Yeah,
and I think that's a solid category that I don't think anyone would dispute that it is its own category. Very different types of systems and different setups that maintain critical infrastructure.
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out what you're doing with this network one. It says network traffic analysis, packet inspection, packet capture. Does that become a network security bucket with those as tags? I don't
That
think
just
you finished
imported.
that one.
I think that imported incorrectly. I think that the category is network traffic analysis, which encompasses packet inspection, packet capture. I would put NetFlow, like a tag of NetFlow in there as well. Anything that's analyzing network traffic, including the collection of packets. So, the Gigamons and Ixias of the world, and packet inspection, that could be a number of different things, right? NetFlow, all that stuff, flow data.
Yep. Okay. All right. Had to clarify that one. Now, this is where we were going to have an interesting conversation because you have OSINT and social engineering as two separate categories. And so my question to you right before the segment was, well, isn't OSINT part of social engineering? But I guess
potentially,
maybe
yeah.
not.
I mean, it depends on the context. However, I look at open source intelligence gathering as the tools, methods, and processes that you partake in to discover information about a person, place, or thing, really, right? And so that could be maybe you're on a pen test, you need to discover information about your targets. It could be you're working with law enforcement and need to uncover facts that are used in an investigation, any number of uses of the open source intelligence gathering process. Now, that information can also be used in your social engineering attacks. And I think the tools, methods, and techniques that you employ for social engineering and the skills that you're building made it deserve its own category. How you talk to people, how you use technology and information to socially engineer people is a different topic from talking about how you do the information collection.
Got it. Okay. I'll go with that one.
You buy that now? I mean, you can disagree, but yeah.
I'll buy that one now. The other one that was interesting is you put file integrity monitoring in 3 different buckets.
I did.
Which I thought was really interesting. It's in endpoint security, which we already talked about.
Yep.
You put it into SIM because I know some of our previous sponsors, right? SIM vendors have file integrity monitoring. You also put it in vulnerability management.
It lives there too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a tag that lives in 3 different categories, and I think that was a kind of a telltale sign that it wasn't a true category on its own when it could be applied to multiple other categories that it already defined. I'm like, that really means it's a feature, right? So UEBA would be attached to SIM and log analysis or operations, right? So that was one of the ways I kind of consolidated the list down, was these technologies that were a category at one time, but I think it's matured out into being a feature.
Don't tell Jeff that because PCI is going to have to update the PCI data security standard requirements, and Tripwire might disagree with you slightly, even though they do have a vulnerability management product too.
I call it as I see them. I did put compliance in as obviously a major category, and that's where PCI largely would fall.
Right.
Obviously.
Agree. Yes. Yeah. The other one is we have third-party risk management is separate from the risk side. You might want to think about how we look at that one because it can be a compliance driver too. So it was interesting you left that one.
I did.
Kind of alone.
It's funny you say that, Matt, because I did toy with moving it somewhere, but I'm like, it really is its own thing. When you're evaluating the risk of your third-party vendors and partners, it's I don't know, it's a different niche, right, than compliance. Becoming PCI compliant, for example, right, is a different process than you would go through to evaluate the risk of your third-party vendors. And in the vendor land, there are very separate lists of vendors that do third-party risks, separate from really all the other vendors on the list that fall into the other categories. So that was my rationale behind that. It's still there for now. Could change, but
it could change. Any other points in here you wanted to point out? Because I think I covered most of the ones I wanted to cover.
Yeah, I think that one that I'm excited about is attack simulation. And to me, that's a separate category and a separate process that you go through that you need to have in your organizations today. And it could be, I almost put it in blue team. However, it could also fall in red team or purple team, right? which are not necessarily individual categories. It could fall maybe into penetration testing, but not really. But I think with the strong presence from multiple vendors in that are dedicated to this activity and how the process integrates into your organization, it deserved a category on its own. So if you're not looking at attack simulation techniques, whether that's something that your internal red team is doing as a process and maybe writing some of their own scripts and software to do, there are absolutely great tools out there to aid your internal red teams that fall in this category.
That's great. Now what we have to do is finalize this list, update the listener interest list on the website, and then I get to go retag a bunch of content to make sure it aligns to the new structure. So as soon as you're done, let me know so I can go do all the cleanup.
Yeah, and I think another one also for executives, I separated security awareness and security training. To me, those are two completely different things, right? And then sometimes they get lumped together, and some may see this and go, why is that awareness and that's training? Awareness is completely different from actual security training. So training, we think of the great training organizations that we have, like SANS and many others that are providing training to information security professionals. When I think of awareness, that's the process and campaigns you're going through to help your users not be the victim in many different attacks. Anything else in there that was interesting, Matt? Or
no. I mean, the rest of it made complete sense, right? It was just how to consolidate some of that down, make it a little more efficient. I think that's a great overview of what our listeners are going to see going forward, but also areas that organizations have to look at.
Yeah.
Right. I think what we've done now is come up with a pretty consolidated list of these are the different security categories that organizations will have to address in some form or fashion as part of their overall security program.
Now,
So
final
it's
point,
a good
Matt,
roadmap.
We did look at all of the lists, the NIST cybersecurity framework, the MITRE attack matrix, and because I know there's listeners out there thinking, well, why didn't you just use one of those? We absolutely pulled from all of those to develop not just this list, but our quadrants that we use in many of our webcasts and such. I definitely read all of those standards and frameworks, right? Right down to card decks, like the breaches. What is the John Strand thing? He did a segment on it. Extra Hop had a deck of cards that talk about attack vectors and defensive things. I mean, backdoors and breaches. Thank you, Johnny. We looked through all that content to feed ultimately this list. So hey, if you have any suggestions, we're more than happy to solicit your feedback.
Absolutely. We'll take listener feedback any day.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be on this list either.
Cool.
Paul, thank you so much for helping me review the updates to our list. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.